Hello, everyone, and welcome to In Conversation, Queer Perspectives on Writing and Family, with authors Liana Cusmano and Christopher DiRaddo. This event is organized by Accenti Magazine in collaboration with the Association of Italian Canadian Writers, the AICW, with the support of the Canada Council for the Arts via the Writers' Union of Canada. My name is Licia Canton, founding editor-in-chief of Accenti Magazine and past president of the AICW. Before we begin this very important conversation, I'd like to invite Chris to the microphone.
Thank you, Licia. Yes, before we begin, I've been invited to start with a land acknowledgement. I would like to say that many of us tonight are queer Canadians of Italian origin, and as such, we are settlers on this land. And I'd like to acknowledge the communities who were here before us, namely where Licia, Liana, and I are calling in from today, the communities of the Kanien'kehá:ka, because the city of Montreal, where we're based, is unceded territory and known as Tujage in the Mohawk language. And we are very grateful to be able to live and work on these lands. And we honor and thank the traditional custodians of this land and strive to work for the success of future generations. Thank you, Licia.
Thanks very much, Chris. This is our second event of the year. It's my pleasure to introduce our guests, Liana Cusmano and Christopher DiRaddo. Liana Cusmano, also known as By Curious George, is a writer, filmmaker, spoken word artist who works in English, French, and Italian. Liana is the 2018 and 2019 Montreal Slam champion and author of the novel Catch and Release, published in 2022. Liana wrote and directed two shorts, Matters of Great Unimportance, 2018, and La Femme Finale, 2016, the latter screened at the Cannes Film Festival. Liana is also fiction editor at Carte Blanche. Christopher DiRaddo is the author of two novels, The Geography of Pluto, published in 2014, and The Family Way, published in 2021. Since 2014, Chris has worked to create a space for LGBTQ+ literature in Montreal, producing and hosting the Violet Hour reading series. He is past president of the Quebec Writers Federation and former evaluation committee member on the Conseil des Arts de Montréal. Welcome, Liana and Chris, and the microphone is yours.
Thanks very much. It's lovely to be here with everyone. Thank you all for attending. I am really excited to talk about writing and family, and specifically how we queer those two practices of writing and of having a family, and how those three elements can all come together and also come apart in lots of different ways. I write fiction. I also write poetry and spoken word. And so there's a lot of writing going on, a lot of family in there, and a lot of queer stuff. And so I'm really excited to talk about these things with you, Chris, and to have everyone be here to participate.
Yeah, thank you so much, Liana. I completely agree. The topic was very much of interest to me, and I'm really looking forward to digging into it. Just a bit of a note, if people see me looking this way, I've got my questions here. I've got a double monitor thing, so I don't want people to think that I'm looking at Facebook while we're going through this conversation. But I've got a ton of questions for you, Liana, so I'm sure we're not going to be able to get them to them all, but
no.
Just looking forward to having a conversation on the subject.
Yeah, I think it's going to be great. I can kick us off, Chris. I was really thinking about this, and I put together some questions, and every question had a number of sub-questions.
Yeah.
And my prediction for this conversation is that we'll be going in a number of different directions, because it's so easy to branch out into lots of different subjects and areas when you talk about a topic like this. So I'll start off with asking you how your relationships to queerness, to family, and to writing have changed or evolved over time, because none of these things exist in a single moment, and they all change as we grow. And so for you, how have they evolved?
For sure, thanks. I think for me, writing and queerness was always at the beginning. Like, I knew that I wanted to be a writer from a very young age, and No, I guess I shouldn't say that, because I guess I wanted to be a writer for the long time the queerness wasn't there. I really wasn't sure what I would write about. And I think as many people, you're trying to figure out what you have to say about the world. And when I was 16 or when I was 17, I don't think I really knew what I wanted to say. I would try to write Stephen King type short stories and, not even really interested in horror, but it was something that I knew an author, I knew what he kind of wrote, and maybe if I could be a writer, I could try to kind of mimic him. But it really wasn't until I came out then and had my heart broken by a guy, I felt, oh, I have something to write about. I actually have a lot of things to write about. And that's where I think the queerness came in. And then I couldn't stop writing. Family, however, was something I think is only something that really recently became involved in my writing. I think with the first book, I knew that I wanted to write a story of a queer person who had their heart broken. But as I was writing about that, the queer person's mother kind of started coming into the story and became a central character. And then with my second book, The Family Way, I found myself writing about how queer people make families. I think it was a bit of an extension of that. Like, whereas I was writing about the mother in the first book, I was kind of writing about the role of the father in the second book. So I think that's, I guess, for me, how it's changed over time. I seem to keep adding to it, adding to it. And I think even my next book is going to go even deeper in family. So it's a subject matter I find endlessly fascinating. And I don't think there's enough that I have to say on the subject. How about yourself? Where do these three intersect in terms of your writing?
I like how you said that at some point you just couldn't stop. You had so many things to say. And I think for me, it's very similar. There are so many things that I have had to say about queerness and writing and family. My first book, Catch and Release, when I wrote it, I was identifying as a young woman. I don't identify as a woman anymore. I identify as non-binary. But at the time, I was a woman writing about this woman who falls for this other woman. And I got responses from publishers who said, a same-sex obsession in a romantic way will never be enough for a whole novel. And I was like, you do not know very many queer people at all. Very, very clearly.
Yeah.
And I think that when it comes to spoken word, as opposed to fiction, that's where family and queerness and writing, the three of them all together, seem to converge a little bit more for me. And I think that it's evolved very much in the sense that I write a lot more about my grandparents and my identity as a queer person in relation to my grandparents, and my queer identity as a writer in relation to my grandparents in spoken word. And so those very specific elements have been coming closer together most recently, because my grandparents all met my partner. And when I was younger, writing poetry about queerness, or about how queer I was or how I felt, I had never imagined that that was something that could ever happen. And so my changing reality became very much reflected in what I wrote about. And so those changes in my relationship with myself, with my partner, with my family, all of those have been coming together quite recently, I think, and specifically in spoken word and not so much in fiction, which I think is different from what you just said about Geography of Pluto and Family Way, like these novels about how all those things intersect.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm curious to know, so you've been doing spoken word for a while, but your first novel came out last summer. And, first books tend to be quite personal. And, it's often the first time a lot of your family members will read, will have friends too, and family members can kind of peek inside your mind and see how you think. And I'm kind of curious, what was that experience like for you, particularly, I guess, with your family, knowing that people were going to be able to kind of think how you might be thinking, although it is fiction, I think there is still kind of a personal element to a lot of this work. So what was that experience like for you?
It's a great question, because before the book was finished, and definitely before it was published, I had only ever shown it to friends. I had never shown it to any members of my family. And a part of me knew that there was a significant chance that it would never be published and nobody would ever read it. So it was very good as a writer who was trying their hand at a novel for the first time to not really worry about it. There was the feeling of, well, it would be a little disappointing if nobody read this because I have things to say that I think other people would want to hear. And on the other hand, it's liberating to think that nobody will ever read this. And if in 15 years I look back on it and realize that, I would write the whole thing over again, I can feel this sense of relief. It was really intimidating to realize that this thing is going to be published and people are going to read it, and my family is going to read it and going to have opinions about it. And I think for me, the most difficult thing to sort of contend with was the idea that it's fiction, heavily inspired by things that actually happened. And I found myself having these conversations often with friends and family members, and I've seen other writers go through it too, to have readers ask, well, who is this character based on? Or what events inspired this particular passage? And the answer is always, well, this, and also none of that. There's this really interesting connection between all and none, where it's fiction, but it's also authentic fiction based in a very specific truth. And truth, I think, is something that, we all have to deal with in one way or another, but specifically within families and family histories, the question, what is the truth? What is the truth to you? How is your truth interpreted by somebody else? So my family had always been really, really supportive of my writing, and they were very supportive when the book came out. And there are some things that I wrote into the book that never actually happened, but I don't feel obliged to point them out. And so I leave them sort of shrouded in mystery. And some readers, including my family, are not big fans of that, because people want to know. They want to know exactly what happened, exactly what's true. But it's fiction. And as the author, I reserve the right not to explain everything because it's a novel. And that's it.
I agree too. I get that question a lot, what happened? Is it autobiographical? And for both of my books, because there's two of them now. And, the main character also in both of the books, I have to say, kind of resembles me. So, I mean, if you know me, you probably are projecting me onto the main characters. And the answer I tend to give a lot is just, well, you know what? It's fiction, but its spirit is autobiographical. I think there's so much in the book that feels very kind of authentic to me and who I am as a person. So if you were to read it, I think you'll see me in it. You'll understand me. If you like the character, you'll probably like me. If you don't like the character, you probably won't like me. Yeah, and I have to find that I feel like I'm guilty of it too sometimes when I read another writer's book, and I want to know really, what did happen? Did this really happen to you? But I've learned not to ask that question. Just kind of leave it in my imagination.
Are both your novels written in the first person?
Yes.
Yeah, and so is mine. And I think for some people they really jump. We all do it as readers. We really jump onto that. Yeah. That will tend to blur together the author, the narrator, and the protagonist when they're actually all usually distinct.
I think now's the time where maybe I can do a little reading first.
I think that would be great.
Is it me? Yeah,
yes.
Okay.
I am inviting you to read, Chris.
All right. So I'm going to read a section from The Family Way. So as I think I mentioned, it is a story of someone who's been, maybe I didn't mention this. My main character is a gay man named Paul who is about to turn 40, and he's been asked by two friends to help them start a family. And the book kind of examines both, kind of follows that experience, but at the same time also examines the relationship that Paul has with his father and also with his lover, Michael, who's a little bit younger than him. So I'm going to read here, this is the beginning of chapter 8. And so at this point, he's about to turn 40, like I said, and he's already started this process of trying to help bring life into the world. Michael and I kept a calendar on our fridge. We rarely consulted it, appreciating it more for its vintage beefcake shots of men in classical poses. On the first of the month, I flipped the page from July to August, and there, under a stunning black and white photo of a buff and smiling naked man leaning against the tree, Michael had circled the 6th with the words Paul's big day in big black marker. Originally, the plan had been for me to host a dinner party on my birthday, but after I told my friends Charles and Danny about my idea, Charles had called and said no, I would not host my own birthday party. Instead, we would do it at his loft, and he'd be one to have it catered. He also offered to make it one of his souper des femmes, so everyone would be invited to come in drag or dress or any costume that undermined gender. I was touched. The day before, I came home from work to find Michael sitting in front of the stove, the light in the oven on. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Baking cookies," he said. "What kind?" "Your favorite, chocolate chip." I kissed him on the head and left the kitchen to change out of my work clothes. When I returned, Michael was in the same spot, silent, watching the treats rise like a dog at the door waiting for its master. When the cookies were ready, he took them out and cooled them on the counter. He put a few aside and placed them in a plastic container, separating each one by a square of wax paper. "Who are those for?" I asked. "The neighbors," he said. Michael put on his sailor hat and kissed me as he zipped downstairs out the door to visit Jean and Allison, who lived downstairs. I snuck a cookie and went into the living room with a bunch of takeout flyers to order us dinner. But as I was about to dial, the phone rang in my hand. I looked at the call display and saw it was my father. "Hello, happy birthday, son," he said after I answered. "Thanks, Dad. It's not until tomorrow, you know." I know, he said, and I could hear the joy in his voice. "I wanted to be the first to call. You were born 3 minutes after midnight, but I figured you'd be in bed by then." "Well, you'd figured right," I said. "I can't believe you're turning 40, son." "I can't believe it either," I said. "I still remember the party we threw for you for your 40th at the Legion." My mind saw blue and white streamers strung across bowling trophies, cases of Molson X and Labatt 50 behind the bar. I must have been, what, 14? And Kate 16? I can't imagine what it was like turning 40 with 2 teenagers in tow. "How'd you do it?" "Lots of beer," he said. "And of course there was your mother, God love her." "How are you doing, Dad? How's Debbie?" "She's good, off biking today with her friends." I pictured my stepmother Debbie in a helmet and dark glasses with a fluorescent cycling jersey and a plastic water bottle. Didn't feel like joining them? "Not today," he said. "I'm coming down with a cold, so I'm watching daytime television. Lots of talk shows and people arguing with each other. Everyone has an opinion these days. I'm tired of other people's opinions." "And you're not even on Facebook," I said. My dad laughed. "I wouldn't be caught dead on that thing. Debbie is on it enough for the both of us. I figure if something important does happen, she'll let me know." "So what are you going to do on the big day?" he asked. "Oh, just dinner at a friend's," I said, debating telling him that we'd all be in drag. "Sounds nice. So when are you and Michael going to come visit?" "I don't know, Dad. It's hard for me to get away." "You'd love Kelowna," he said. Debbie and I could show you around, and it would be great for you to get to know Patrick and Sue better. I wish you and Kate had come out to Sue's wedding. You could have met that whole side of the family." Debbie's daughter, Sue, had got married the year before to a roofer named Neil. But neither I nor Kate had attended the wedding. I suppose we could have, but neither of us wanted to travel all that way. Plus, it had been Gay Pride in Montreal, and I didn't want to miss it. My dad might have considered Debbie's relations to be that side of the family, but the idea was ridiculous to me. They weren't a part of our family, so we didn't need to be there. "I know," I said. I'm sorry I missed it. It would have been nice of you to come visit. It would be nice for you to come visit sometime. Your sister's been twice now." "Anyways," he said, wrapping things up as our calls never did last for more than several minutes. "Tomorrow will be a big day for you, and I wanted to call and wish you a happy birthday before things got too hectic. You know, your mother would have been very proud of what you've accomplished." I froze for a second, a flash of heat in my body. "Thanks, Dad." "Love you, son. Talk soon." I hung up the phone and composed myself. My dad had gotten soft with age. He was 67 now and more expressive than I ever remember him being. I don't think he had ever said "I love you" to me growing up, but it's how he ended his calls with me for the past few years. I did feel bad for not visiting, but I only got so much time off of work. Kelowna might be nice, but it wasn't a bustling metropolis like New York City, nor did it have the province town's very gay, sandy beaches. The flight to Kelowna would be long, too. I looked it up one afternoon and learned that it would take 7.5 hours to get there from Montreal. That's a lot of time in the air. There were no direct flights, which meant I'd have to experience twice as many landings and takeoffs. "Who was that?" Michael said, now standing in the doorway to our living room. "My dad. Calling to wish you a happy birthday." "Did you tell him?" No. There was still nothing to tell. I had recently heard from Wendy, and our second attempt hadn't worked either. "We should really visit him sometime," I said. Or I should, at least. But thank you.
Thanks very much. It's a habit for me now to snap
Snap.
after people read. I love the family way. I love that excerpt. Thank you for reading. The thing that struck me the most was that Paul forgoes this wedding between two people that his father would consider that side of the family. And one of the reasons is that Pride is taking place in Montreal. And for many of us, that's a time that we spend with our chosen families. And so the first question that comes to mind for me is, what does family and what does chosen family mean to you? Especially in the context of being a sperm donor, which is something that you and Paul share.
Yeah, that's a very good question. You know, I often feel like I walk a line between the two. You know, like I find that I'm very lucky though that I have a very close relationship with my family. Like, you know, my parents, you know, they're very accepting. We've had our ups and downs about, like, you know, my sexuality for sure, but we're at a point right now where they're very accepting. They met my partner, they love him. So I have nothing, you know, sometimes I find, like, especially in popular culture, it's either one or the other. Sometimes it's either like, you know, you're estranged from your family, you know, and you're just in your queer community, or you're kind of like trying to escape your kind of family of origin and trying to find community. But like for me, it was always like between the two. So that's what I really wanted to show in this too, is that, like, you know, there are these decisions that you have to make when you're a queer person. Like, exactly, like, you know, Paul's father has remarried. His, you know, his wife has died. Paul's mother has died, and he's decided to kind of like pursue family, like another type of family too. And that, like, you know, it's all, I wouldn't say like it's an alternative family, but it's a different family than Paul is used to, right? Like he has his own family out there, and so Paul is very resistant to that. So I felt like the situation added for a lot of tension and really allowed me to kind of show how we try to navigate that line as like queer people. And then, you know, the whole thing about being a sperm donor too is almost this extra level of complexity too. You know, I think when I came out to my family, I don't think they expected me to kind of come out a second time and say, by the way, I'm going to have a child with two friends, right? Like that's almost like another coming out, this other layer of expectation around, well, you know, what does that mean? You know, what's your involvement going to be like? You know, what's our involvement going to be like? So I feel like, you know, the topic was extremely ripe for me to kind of delve into it. And although it is kind of like you said, kind of based on personal experience, my life didn't have as much drama. So it's really great to kind of like inject that into it and really kind of see
really
exactly,
fun.
you know, what can kind of come up when you put these characters in the situation, and this becomes the topic. All right, well, I think now it's my turn to invite you to read. Would you like to read something for us?
Sure, I would love to. As I said at the beginning, I've been branching out a little bit more into the intersection between queerness and family, and specifically Italian families. And so I'll perform something for all of you called Ma ti fidanzeresti con me. We are watching L'Amica Geniale, my brilliant friend, because I am afraid that my Italian will soon become a ghost inside my mouth, shrink to simple salutations, bookending emails, be relegated to days of the week dancing at the back of my throat. After every episode following season 1, episode 4, where we heard it first, I ask, Ma ti fidanzeresti con me? The subtitles read, do you want to go steady with me? There is no but at the beginning of the translation, no filler word hiding behind a comma like a single tortellino. The words fidanzeresti, fidanzarsi are rooted in the gendered words for fiancé. The act of becoming engaged is posited as a question, as a conditional. Even the verb tense is lost in translation. The series takes place at a time when dating wasn't anything so much as the very brief interlude before marriage, when Fellini and De Sica were at work, when some of my grandparents still lived where they had been born. We watched the series on the big TV screen. I refused to put Parmigiano on our popcorn. As time goes on, still other words evoke a time and place that I thought I had forgotten, a childhood spent on balconies and in backyards and at kitchen tables. Phrases like dammi la manina, vai a prendere un cerotto, andiamo a fare il bagno. As we watch an Italy constructed for the screen, for storytelling, for entertainment, a carousel of memories comes to life inside my head, of holding Nonna's hand as we cross the street, of fetching Band-Aids for Papa from the bathroom cabinet, of going to the beach and playing in the water. I am afraid that the only leftovers of my childhood will be a language that melts in my mouth before I can speak. After every episode, I ask her, Ma ti fidanzeresti con me? because asking in this language and not another feels like reaching into a future where all the words I need are on hand and not on the and she never recognizes the words, only the tone, only the way I look at her when I say it. Ma ti fidanzeresti con me? She never really understands the first time, and I have to repeat it. And so every time I ask her is like the first time, and every time she says yes is like the first time. We live in a daydream of firsts, a real life mini-series of always asking to be together and always saying yes. Ma ti fidanzeresti con me? As if we don't hold hands when we cross the street, as if I don't keep her favorite brand of Band-Aid in my bathroom cabinet, as if we've never been to the beach and played in the water or lain together in the sun. On the day she learns the words posso avere un bacio, may I have a kiss, and says them to me, I realize that this is just another way of saying I love you, which we have said more times and in more ways than I could ever hope to count on all the fingers of all the hands of all the people I knew back when I was 4, on the balcone and in the giardino and a tavola. Ti voglio bene grande così. I love you this much. This love is vaster than the biggest measurement I could hope to express by stretching my arms back when I was 5. Ma ti fidanzeresti con me? I ask as if I don't know the answer because I never get tired of hearing it. I never get tired of hearing her say yes as if it were the first time. I never get tired of hearing words in our mouths that mean home.
I'm gonna do my snaps now. That was wonderful. I love that poem so much. Thank you. It's interesting because like my brilliant friend was such an inspiration for me too. The book and the TV series, and I love how you use it also to, you know, to kind of, it's like what you said, like you want to keep it in your mouth, right? Like the language. And so I'm really jealous because you do speak Italian, and you know, I've been studying on Duolingo for over 500 days now. I'm very proud of myself.
That's great.
I have yet to have a conversation with someone. We're not going to do it here, but you know, maybe one day we can go for a coffee. But I'm curious to know, like what role does Italian language play, I guess, in your identity, and maybe also your identity as a writer? Does it keep you connected to your culture?
When I was younger, and I have 2 younger brothers, and when we were little, we went to an Italian elementary school and the Italian high school, and I didn't know anybody who spoke Italian. And they all went to Italian school that did absolutely nothing for any of them. And my parents would nag us about speaking Italian, and we only speak Italian in this household, and we hated it. It is to this day the greatest nag I've ever experienced, because speaking Italian is something that I'm so grateful for. And as a child, you don't understand that. You just feel like you're being compelled to do something that doesn't make any sense to you. Go to the corner and face the wall and count to 100 in Italian, and I want to hear you. And you're not going back to play until that's done. And it's a huge part of who I am. And it's something that I don't practice very much on a daily basis, unless I speak to my grandparents, really. And their Italian is extremely limited because none of them went past the 8th grade or the 5th grade. And I found myself going to Italy and using words that are not real, that my grandparents made up, and embarrassing myself. Because when I speak to my grandparents, there's a very specific lexicon that is specific to Italian Canadians of a certain generation, of 2 specific age groups, which are the grandchildren and the grandparents, which is a really, really fascinating phenomenon unto itself. And I have no formal instruction in Italian of any kind. And so my spelling is not good. My grammar is not that great. My pronunciation is, okay. But I found myself wanting to include it more in my writing, because it's something that will be lost if you don't work at it. My partner was also learning Italian on Duolingo, and that's fascinating to me because my grandmother has no concept of what Duolingo is. There's this little owl, and it pressures you every day to learn something. And she learned, I think it was il serpente nello stivale, which is the snake is in a boot. And I was like, you're never going to use that in your life. And that's okay. And my Duolingo
also has like same-sex couples doing stuff, which is really interesting. So
that's cool. That's pretty cool. And so, like you said, it was such an inspiration to watch my brilliant friend, because there are words that you hear, like cerotto. Cerotto is not something I ever heard after I passed the age where I needed Band-Aids on a regular basis. And I recently started, my partner and I are watching The Sopranos. We're like 25 years too late, or, behind. And I think it was season 2, episode 4, and they have that song that Andrea Bocelli sang, Con te partirò, just, and it comes in 2 or 3 times in the episode. I grew up on, it feels like it's something that lives in your body when you've heard it so many times from the time you were a little kid. So to answer your question, Italian is something that I hold on to very tightly and that I've been trying to exercise more and more as I get older.
I think too, what's really exciting is being able to kind of queer that, and you are doing that, right? It's only my dad who is Italian on my side, right? And I did not learn the language, but I was surrounded by the culture a lot, like in terms of especially like the family meal and whatnot. But my perception a lot of Italian culture wasn't that it was queer or queer friendly, really. Like and it's, it is kind of exciting now to be, doing some of that work myself, like trying to kind of find ways in which I can create content and create stories that bring these two together in ways that are, I want to say new. Like, I'm not saying, wow, we're so groundbreaking. There are a lot of people are doing it, but it just, for me, it feels very, very fresh because I feel like there is a lot that I can kind of say that can kind of bring this in a bit more.
Would you say that that's part of your goals as a writer, to try to combine those two things a little bit more?
At least for now it is, I mean, who knows forever, but it's definitely inspired me in ways that I never really thought possible. Like, one of my questions, actually, the next question I have was just about the documentary that we both were in, right? So we
That's
were
right.
both in creative spaces that Licia directed about the intersections between being queer and Italian Canadian. And, I credit your mother, like Licia, like for really kind of inspiring me to connect with my Italian roots through this project. Like participating in this project was really important for me because it allowed me to confront a lot of my prejudice or a lot of my assumptions about Italian culture. And like, I never really felt Italian enough, because I was a queer person, because I was only half Italian. But participating in that documentary really kind of opened a floodgate in terms of like content for me and inspiration. So I'm kind of curious for you also, like what has changed for you since participating in that documentary? I mean, it was 2020, right? Like at the beginning of the pandemic.
That's right.
3 years ago, I guess, that we filmed that. Like, how has that been for you?
The most concrete thing that has changed for me is that my partner has met my entire family and participated in those Italian traditions. And we've had those conversations where she'll say, well, why don't you say this or ask this question or do this? And I'll be like, absolutely not. That is just not something that one does. And it could be anything. It could be something really like small and innocuous, and it's not the end of the world. It's just a habit, a cultural habit that you either do or don't do. And it's really difficult to explain. Like right now, I can't even think of a single specific example because it's almost ineffable. It really depends on time and place. And so it's been really interesting to bring my grandmother and my partner together in the same room and to think to myself, like, I never thought this would ever happen. And my grandmother still thinks that I'm a woman and I'm gay and I'm never going to have children ever. And my grandfather talks to me talks about me in the past tense. You never got married. And I was, these very interesting cultural generational things that are now up against something that nobody ever thought would happen, which is queerness. These two queer people, or this one queer person who has brought this other queer person into the family. And so for me, since that documentary, I'm still queer. I still write about queerness. My family is still supportive. My immediate family is still supportive of me and my writing and my queerness, but now also my extended family has really been introduced to that. And I never thought that I would come out to my grandmother And I never thought that she would ever like it. And even now I can tell myself, oh, I'll never tell my grandmother that I use they, them pronouns. That's not something that I'll ever do. But I said the exact same thing about coming out to her as a bisexual person. And so you never know what's going to happen or not happen. And it's been really, really interesting to see that evolution. And I extend it, you know, there's so many different ways to queer family. There's so many different ways to queer your everyday typical actions. I extend this almost to, you know, the concept of having pets. Pets was not something that, you know, my grandparents' generation ever did unless it was an animal that could fulfill a purpose. You know, my pet rabbit is a creature that I keep alive with my own resources and that I am not raising for food, which is very much queering the concept of having an animal in your possession. And I never expected my grandparents to understand that either. And now they ask about, you know, videos. As I say this, I see that cat there in one of the participant screens, which is great to share our lives with these small creatures. And you know, none of us should ever have to justify the joy that we feel for the animals that live with us. But it's something that I've had to explain to my grandparents many times. The same way I've had to explain, well, there's not just gay and straight, there's other stuff going on. And to have them be like, you mean you're like that person on, what was that show? C'è posta per te? C'è posta per te was this show that ran on Tele Latino, and it was about these estranged family members who have to come back together. And the general understanding is that the host was a lesbian woman and that was bad. Like, I grew up internalizing that. And that was something that my grandparents had also internalized as this is what a queer person looks like. And so I had to challenge a lot of those preconceptions, and my grandparents had to challenge a lot of those preconceptions.
Can I just, you know, what you were saying about pets just like struck a chord with me, you know, like, so my partner and I, like, we lost our cat in
Theo.
October of this year, Theo. And, you know, my partner and I have been together 14 years and we had Theo for 13 of them. So, and all, you know, he was like our kid, right? Like, you know, and I remember, like, he was sick for 2.5 years. And so Greg and I would, like, you know, go to the vet 4 times a year, get all these supplies. Every day we would give him injections. Like, you know, we just loved and cared for him so much, as if he was, and I remember going to like this party at my Italian cousin's place. And I was trying to explain to him at the time, like, oh, my cat's sick. And, you know, I almost didn't come. And he's like, oh, you know what we would do in my day? And I'm like, what? He's like, new cat.
Oh God.
And I was just like, okay, you know, like, and again, I was just like, wow, okay, you know, we're just totally not on the same page, you know, and you know, he's got like kids, and he's actually my cousin's a grandfather, right? Like, you know, so I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done to really just show people what it means to kind of be a queer person and have a family. Like, you know, I think they understand our partners now. I think they understand, like, you know, like generally, you know, but even beyond that, even just like saying like our friends are our family. Like, you know, if I had a friend call me up in the middle of the night and needed me to do, I'm going to be there for them, right? Like,
that's right.
Not to say that like my cousin wouldn't, but my cousin has a different set of priorities because he has his family. He has them all kind of built in. They're all in his house. You know, he sees them every week. And I feel like that to me is something that, and it's not just Italian people, I would say, that kind of have that. I think it's just in general. And I feel like that's something that I would love to see more of in literature and popular culture, is the different ways in which we actually do have family and how those families are valid.
I think so. I think you make a really, really good point. How do we explain to the traditional members of our families the way that we are queering the concept of family? And I think that ties into writing very nicely, because to me, in many ways, writing is the queering of the traditional career path. To queer something or some place or some activity, to queer it as a verb, is, I think, a really, really interesting phenomenon. To this day, I don't think my grandparents have any idea what I do. They have no idea what I do. I work at the computer, and I work for a nonprofit, and I write my poems. And the nonprofit that I work for, called Poetry and Voice, also makes poetry accessible to elementary and high school students across Canada. And it's not something that ever really struck a chord with them. And the concept of work I think that's something that's a little bit easier to understand, is that you work very hard, you work a certain number of hours, you have specific financial or personal or professional goals. But the concept of the gig economy, the concept of working as a writer and balancing that with other personal or professional commitments is something that is totally foreign to people of a certain age, of a certain generation, and specifically of an Italian generation, certainly in my family. I don't know the Italian word for self-employed. So I think the next question I have for you in that vein is, how do you strike the work-life balance of being a writer in professional circumstances? Because I think the days of, like, for a lot of us, of working 9 to 5 at an office job from the time you're 18 or 19 until you're 65, that's increasingly rare and increasingly difficult to maintain. So how do you balance writing when you're working either full-time, part-time, when you're in between jobs, when you're self-employed? What does that look like for you? And how do you explain it to people who may ask?
It's tough, like, it's funny because, like, I have a career as a communications professional, like I've worked for many different organizations, and I think people are always impressed when you say, oh, I'm writing a novel, right? Like, but then when you actually publish it, they're like, holy cow, you wrote a novel? Like, how did you do
They didn't
that?
believe
Like,
you when you
they
said
didn't
it.
believe, yeah, oh, that's cute. You think you've got a
Good
nice,
for you.
good for you. It took me 14 years to write my first book. It took me 7 years to write my second book. Neither of them made me really any money. Like, to be frank, it's not something that I'm putting all of my eggs in one basket. Is that the metaphor?
Yeah.
And I had a frank conversation too once with someone who is kind of high up in CanLit, and he basically told me, he's like, do you know how few people in the country actually make a living from their writing? And so, like, I've what I've tried to do is manage my own expectations around that, and not kind of like, okay, I'm just going to do this communications thing until my writing takes off. I don't know if my writing will ever kind of take off, but as long as I'm having fun doing it, I'm going to keep doing it. So I guess in that way, it's hard to say it. It's like, it feels like a hobby to me, like, because it's something that's never really going to put meat on the table, at least not now. So I think I was saying, am I answering your question there? It's complicated for me. Like, I'm always trying, though, to find ways to work that dovetail with my interest in writing, right? So, working as a journalist, or like the work you're doing, I'm sure is extremely rewarding. I've done a lot of stuff with, like, literary organizations as well as in promotion, and that's always, it keeps my toe in the water. But I just have to really turn the screws with myself and make sure that I'm sitting in the seat when I can, if it's every day for like a half an hour, even if it's like opening a Word document and looking at the words for like 5 minutes. I just need to, I'm not always saying that I'm really good at it, but I try to find the time. And then, I'm the one who on the weekends will want to write, like, I'm like, it's my day off, I'm going to write, and that's what I try to do, but it ends up taking so long. How about yourself? Like, how do you negotiate the two?
It's really hard, which is exactly what you said. I think being flexible, but also disciplined with yourself is really important. So what you said about tightening the screws, making sure that you, even if it's just to open the Word document, I think that's really important. So much of it is getting into the mental space. If I look up a really, really specific fact about snails that I heard somewhere and that I need to corroborate for this poem that I really want to finish and that I've been working on for 6 years, and that takes me 2 hours, that's part of the writing process, because that detail, the complexity and wordplay of the entire piece hinges on that one detail. And so sometimes someone will ask, what did you do today? And I'll say, oh, well, geez, I just was on Wikipedia all day. And I didn't produce anything. It still counts as work. It's just difficult to explain it that way because you don't have anything to show for it. You don't have a product to offer up to people. And so I think it's important sometimes to set aside a really, really specific day or a really specific time of day, and to treat it like any other doctor's appointment or professional commitment. Like, from this time to this time, I am not available, because why should this professional goal of mine, or this personal goal, or this creative goal be any less important than my physical health or my professional commitments. I think it's a question of deciding what your priorities are and then sticking to those. And it's difficult to do that because we're taught that we need to produce, or we need to prove what it is that we've done, or we need to expend energy in a way that's productive or logical to anybody who would happen to ask. And none of that is true. They're all just things that we've sort of internalized and that we take as fact. And it takes a lot of confidence and nerve to say, actually, I'm going to spend the whole day writing, I'm going to finish my novel, or I'm going to tackle a new poem about what have you. And it's important to me and I'm going to do it. And I don't care what anybody else has to say about it, which is really challenging. The thing that helped me the most was to say, on this day, I am writing on this day.
I find I get depressed if I take myself away from it too long.
Mm-hmm.
I find I get miserable, I get angry, I get like, and I think I only realized that recently. Like, I get more anxious when I'm not able to do it. Even if it is just, like I said, 15 minutes a day, I need the proximity to it. And, for a while there, I was doing those Let's Write that.
Yes, we did one or two together. Yeah.
The AICW. Yeah. And I felt that was really great to kind of just be accountable, sit in the chair, bang out as much as I can. Some days were good, some days were bad, but I know we're kind of coming to the end of the time here, but I was kind of curious about what's next for you in terms of your projects. I mean, you've published a novel, you're still obviously writing poetry. Are you working on anything?
I'm working on my first poetry manuscript, which I'm finalizing with a couple of wonderful mentors. And I would like to see it published in the next couple of years. So for me, the next project is the first, we were talking about concreteness and products, is to have a concrete product in my hand to embody spoken word and poetry. And so that's the next thing. And I've noticed that when I perform, when I do shows, when I go to classrooms, it's difficult to just rattle off a poem one after another. And so in between, you have sort of banter. And I've realized that it's almost like small individual miniature stand-up routines in between each poem, which I think might be something really interesting to explore. What about yourself?
I'd like to see that. Myself, yeah, I'm working on my next novel. I'm kind of making a lot of progress on it, which feels really great. There's a lot of research in this one as well, which involves a lot of family research in terms of like where my family comes from, and also like in terms of Italy, but also Montreal. And at the same time too, I've just decided that I wanted to turn The Family Way into a TV series. I don't know.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of
idea.
experience in screenwriting, but that's something it's a skill I want to develop. So that might be something that will pursue this summer if I can.
That's fantastic. I would love to see that on the small screen, silver screen.
Does anyone have questions? Should we take some questions?
Absolutely. If there are any questions from the audience.
So there's a question here. I'll read it. Chris and Liana, the Canadian publishing industry is very inclusive. Is the Italian publishing industry queer friendly? Would they be interested in translating Here and Now, which is an anthology of queer Italian Canadian writing?
Good question.
I just went to Guadalajara for like this literary festival. I was lucky enough to be able to go, and my editor met with a bunch of people from different countries, including someone from Italy, who basically told him, no one's going to be interested in that. They're still very conservative there. And I was like, oh, okay, well, at least it was a firm no.
Yeah, they were honest.
I refuse to kind of give up on that. I think there are some publishers that are publishing queer works. I just don't know who they are, and I'm trying to find out. I'm trying to do research. I'm following people on Instagram, and there's a couple of publishers that seem to publish queer authors. So, but they tend to be really famous queer authors, right? So, yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that, Liana?
There was an Italian publisher who had expressed interest in translating my book Catch and Release, and I have not heard anything from them since then. which is interesting because this whole conversation has been about family and queerness and writing. And if my book were to be translated in Italian, my grandparents would be able to read it, which is not something that I had ever counted on. And as for, the inclusivity of the Italian publishing scene, it's like you said, Chris, I don't know. Definitely something worth exploring for those of us who are queer and Italian Canadian, for sure.
All right, any other questions?
Can I just, hi everybody. Just on this, I wanted to say about publishers. I'm at the moment involved with the Fandango, who seems to be very, very open to queer literature and queer also theoretical work. So there are certainly new small publishers, but not so small. Fandango is a medium one, who are interested in queer literature. There are not many of being published in translation recently for what concerns more theoretical work than literature, but there is also interest in literature. So I would really try to, to push and pursue that. I mean, you have always to bear a bit with Italian published. They might not answer immediately, but I think that there is a period where there's a lot of being published. Also recently, in the last couple of years, a lot of, for example, the translation of Belux have been published. And I've got a friend who's translating them, and I'm co-translating now an anthology of writing by Sarah Ahmed. And with the same publisher, there will be another book by Ahmed being translated now and being published. So there's, Gloria Zaldúa has been just translated. There's a lot of new work being published. I've seen like in the last in a few months. So I think it's the moment to, to try to at least try to, to see if you manage to, to get through. At least, I'm not sure exactly which, but there is Eris Edizione, for example, FQ, which is interested in queer stuff, Edizioni Minoritarie, that publishes mainly theoretical work. But Fandango itself maybe might be edited, published.
Yeah, I found one called Playground. I don't know if it's connected to Fandango, but it would seem they were publishing Edmund White and never heard back from them. I kind of sent stuff, but yeah, I think we just have to be tenacious. We have to kind of just be, sometimes it's always about like meeting the right people and being in the right spaces, right? So
but definitely.
Thank you. Oh, well, thank you everyone for like the comments in the chat. This is really wonderful.
Michael, did you have a question? I saw your hand go up a couple times, and your
sorry.
dog walking in the background.
I was trying to use the reactions, but it wasn't working. I didn't know if either of you had something that was queer in Italian that you would recommend, whether that be a TV show or a book or a graphic novel or whatever it might be. I didn't know if there's anything that inspired you in that way.
That's a great question. Do you mind if I go first?
No, not at all. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So because I'm so wanting to learn Italian, I'm actually absorbing a lot of either Italian music and film and television. I discovered two really great series that I really loved. They're one's on Netflix and one's on Prime. The one on Netflix is called Baby, and it's set in a high school, and the main characters are not queer, but they do have a queer storyline, which I found was really well done. The son of the principal of the school is kind of queer, and he deals with a lot of bullying, but I don't want to give any much away, but it's just about like kind of high school tensions and drama. And then on Prime, there's a series called Prisma, which is also set in high school, and it's the story of two identical twins. The one actor plays both roles, and one of the twins is questioning his sexuality and also gender identity. And I don't know, I just find it's so well shot. The acting is really great, the dialogue is great, and it's so beautiful to see it like set in like places like Rome and whatnot. So you kind of get it all. Those are two things that come immediately to mind to me.
Nothing immediately came to mind for me. And so I'm glad to hear about those two things. I think it's always exciting to see films and television and popular culture where these two identities can converge. The only thing that came to mind for me was queer coded sort of Italian icons, based on discussions I've had with Elio Iannacci, who's in this Zoom room, like Mina. I went through my grandmother's house and took all of her Mina tapes. The tapes from, what are they? They're sort of over there in the corner from Gente, which is the only intersection between queer and Italian identity that I could find in the physical place of my grandmother's house. And so to look for other examples of that in art, I think is really exciting and really important. So I'll be looking into those two things that you mentioned, Chris.
And if people here also have things to recommend, please put it in the chat.
Yes. Gender Failure, Ivan Coyote and Ray Spoon. That's a fantastic publication. That's really cool. I'm glad to see that recommended.
There's another question here. Luce?
Hi, yeah. My name's Luce, use they and he pronouns, and I'm trying to figure out this technology. I really enjoyed your conversation and your dialogue, the way you both worked with each other. There's this concept that I couldn't help thinking about, and the whole like choosing to go to the family thing or going to Pride and kind of the conversation around Pride and our family of choice. My friend Maria Fama writes about the comare, and this notion of people that we're not blood related to, but they're like family, and that's the closest thing that I can think to like explain or have even a structure or apparatus in our culture for naming, those that we are close to, that we choose, that are, of our chosen family. So I don't know, I just kind of wanted to comment around that. And Maria Fama's work can be found on Guernica. I think it's called Guernica Press. So anyway,
thank you.
Yeah,
I don't
Thank you
know
for mentioning that.
Yeah, I don't know that term. How does it translate?
How would you translate that? The comare is like your family member who's not blood related. I don't know, Luce, like how you would translate that. Like in some cases, it's like the person who, like your godparent almost, like anybody who was there at your baptism or your communion or your confirmation is non-blood related family. That's right. I had totally forgotten about that.
Yeah, and the way that Maria writes about it is that there were comares that were peers and that would bring each other cards at their holidays and at birthdays, and there's they would bring each other plates of food, and it was this she writes about it in this way that it was very queer, and that she even took a card and crossed out husband and said, to my dear comare, this is a true story. And it's this love affair of the connectedness of family of choice. And also I think it is godparent or godmother, but blood related. I just think there's a real piece to that. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to say is exactly godmother. The immediate translation, but it doesn't really exhaust all the meanings, because you can call a comare someone who's very close to the family, not being a godmother. As for example, in my Italian family, they have a friend, they call her comare, but she's not a godmother, but it's the comare for all of us. So it's a closer family member, closer. Is not blood, there are no blood ties, but is a family, is someone, is part of a family, is just a friend, but but it's more than just a common friend. It's a specific friend or special friend. Yeah. So it's interesting to know that it's been written about. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. There are some great comments in the chat. How could we forget Pier Paolo Pasolini, the giant? Matteo Lane as well. And some of these things some of these terms are unique to certain regions or certain villages or certain families, which is a whole other interesting layer to it. We're coming up on the time. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you, Liana. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm sure we didn't get to most of my questions, so we'll have to go for coffee, Liana.
Oh,
and we
for
can
sure.
Talk a little bit
Yes.
more.
Great.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Okay, there.
Thank you so much, Liana and Chris, for sharing your writing and your experience. The conversation was really stimulating. If anyone is interested in getting a closer look at Liana and Chris, if you haven't seen the documentary, both Liana and Chris are featured in the documentary Creative Spaces, Queer and Italian Canadian 2021, as well as Steve Galluccio with a commentary by, that is academic, scholarly commentary by Dominic Beneventi, who is a queer studies expert. It's on the Accenti YouTube channel, and I've put the link in the chat. Special thanks to the Canada Council for the Arts and the Writers' Union of Canada. This event was organized by Accenti Magazine in collaboration with the Association of Italian Canadian Writers. The next Accenti event is a workshop on January 27th at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, a 90-minute workshop titled Self-Editing 101, Writing Concisely and Effectively with Dominic Cusmano, who is the publisher of Accenti. And I hope some of you will join us. And the AICW holds its second online event of the year on Saturday, January 21st, with readings and academic papers. I want to thank Accenti, that is Dominic behind the scenes, for technical assistance. To find out more about Accenti, go to accenti.ca. You can check out the details for our Festival of the Arts, which will be held in Calabria next June 28th to July 1st. It's Accenti's 20th anniversary. To find out more about the Association of Italian Canadian Writers, I invite you to go to AICW.ca. There are a number of calls for submissions that might be of interest. For instance, the 40th anniversary anthology, we started really early. That will be coming out in 2026. If you're Italian Canadian, if you write, if you're an emerging writer, please look at that on the site, AICW.ca, and, query if you're not sure. Just ask questions. There is also a call for the second volume, the Queer Italian Canadian Anthology. The first one is titled Here and Now. I put the link to that in the chat, and I'm working on a second anthology. And I want to thank those of you here who have already sent submissions to that anthology. Thank you all for being here this evening, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Yes,
Buona
thank you.
serata.
Lovely.
Bye, everyone.
Buona serata.